We are in charge of our health, and we should feel that we have the information to make the right choices for ourselves. And we should have enough insight and internal guidance so we can navigate those choices without asking our doctors or our healthcare providers, okay, what do I do next?
Welcome back to another episode of Good Work. My name is Barrett Brooks. I'm your host, and this is a podcast about how to live a meaningful life, about how to make an impact with your career, and ultimately about how to change the world. My guest today is someone named Dr. Erika Siegel. I came across her work after my doctor here in Portland recommended that I buy her book set. And if you're on YouTube, you can see it right now. I'm holding it up. 2-volume set. And it's called the Nourish Me Kitchen. The first volume is volume 1, Essential Health Wisdom. And the second is a book of recipes. And they are only sold in a package. It's expensive. I think it's like 90 or 120 bucks, something like that. And it is worth every single cent you will spend on it. Dr. Erika is a fellow resident here of my hometown, Portland, Oregon. She is a naturopathic doctor. She's been in the field for close to 20 years now, and is just a wealth of wisdom about health, well-being, how to take care of your body, how to take care of your mind, and everything that has to do with living a life that allows you to do your best work because your body, mind, and spirit are doing well as well. This one is important to me for a lot of different reasons, but one of the biggest ones is that in my coaching practice, I see so many entrepreneurs who are just burning the candle at both ends. And I've taken to getting kind of on a soapbox about this idea that entrepreneurs in so many ways are like professional athletes, not because of how you use your body, which would be a totally extreme example, but because of how much effort, energy, and wherewithal is required to do your job as the founder of a company, as the leader of a company. And every day when you work your 8, 10, 12, 14, 16-hour days, your mind and your body are being put under immense amounts of stress. And that stress compounds over time. And I've seen entrepreneur after entrepreneur go through this period where they break. They don't decide to take a break. Their body makes them. I went through this as well in my early 20s when I was starting my first business. My body just started to break down. I'm still not exactly sure what happened with that, but I know that ever since then, wellness and taking care of myself and preventive care of my body and my mind have been huge priorities for me. And it's still a challenge to this day, even as an experienced entrepreneur who has been through this before. So Dr. Erika has made one of the best book sets that I've seen in terms of just the essential knowledge. It's exactly what it says. It's the essential health wisdom for what you need to know to take care of yourself and sustain yourself so that you can go out in the world and make the impact that you make. This conversation was fantastic. We spent the first half of it talking about her story, her family, about how she became the person capable of doing this work. And we spent the second half talking about tips for managing your health as an entrepreneur, ways that you can take care of yourself so you can sustain your impact over a very long period of time. Just like a professional athlete who's under a lot of stress has to do a lot to sustain their body over a period of time. Entrepreneurs have the same for their bodies and their minds, and a completely different form of output from it. So please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Erika Siegel. I think you'll both learn something from it and also get a lot of inspiration from her story. Let's get to it. Dr. Erika Siegel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Barrett. It's great to be here.
Yes, it's great to have you here. Been looking forward to this for a while. We kind of had some scheduling back and forth, and I will have already introduced you by this point. But the one thing I want to say is that my longtime doctor is a massive fan of you, which automatically made me pay attention because I trust her so much and love her so much. And so I've been really excited about this conversation. And every time I kind of dig into someone's background, I'm trying to find what's the right place to start. Kind of captures an element of who this person is, but also is a little bit more lighthearted than just straight to the like, give us all the information type thing.
Right.
I was kind of perusing your Instagram and saw that I think you're just back from a big wilderness adventure with your family, with your husband and 2 boys. You did 40 miles of hiking in the wilderness over 3 days. And I'm just curious what you learned about yourself, what that experience was like for you.
I'm so glad you're asking this because it's really been a highlight for me. a highlight of maybe the last 2 years, actually. Well, yeah, my family and I, so my husband, who actually has a history of being an adventure racer, so endurance athlete, my two teenage sons, 16 and 17 years old, robust, strong men, and me, we set out for along the Timberline Trail around Mount Hood and did it in 3 days, which is not an aggressive pace, but a pretty good pace. 40 miles with 10,000 feet of elevation gain and loss, and camping and the whole bit, carrying everything on our back. And I knew that I was pushing a real edge for myself. While I'm really strong, usually my physical endeavors are an hour or two long. They're not 10 hours of consistent hiking, and then trying to stay warm in your tent when it's 40 degrees and unpredictable weather. So your question is what I learned about myself. And I was thinking a lot about this throughout the trip because I like to push my areas of comfort, but it's usually in areas that I still actually feel pretty comfortable. Like that might be getting in front of a larger group and doing a talk instead of a small group, or just pushing the edge of something that is already an area of comfort for me. But this was actually an area of discomfort and questionable success. Something I learned was that mental preparation really helped me. I mentally prepared by knowing that I would be uncomfortable and trying to navigate that in advance. How am I going to show up? How am I going to keep my mood right? I knew my mental health was probably the most important piece of me getting around that mountain, and also making sure that my pack was comfortable, that my gear worked. I was really trying to be more self-sufficient and not just rely on my husband and his skill set to, pack everything for me and take care of me. So I went out on my own and made sure I was well outfitted, borrowed from friends who are my size, not just my big guys, but what is it like for a woman who's 5'2" to carry a big backpack? And try to be more self-reliant and get myself around that mountain. Of course, with the help, I needed a lot of help. They carried a lot of my weight. And I think I learned that I'm capable of doing hard things that are quite outside my comfort zone, and the satisfaction that I can get from that. I feel a deeper sense of satisfaction than a lot of my other achievements. And I think it's because it was really outside of that true comfort zone.
I love that. I love spending time outside. And just last week, I was up on Mount Hood, maybe similar days, actually.
Oh,
I always do a hike around my birthday, just solo, and same kind of thing. I'm pretty comfortable outside, but I'm definitely not like a wilderness guide or anything. I've got friends
yeah.
like that. Even just doing 7 miles or 6 miles alone in the forest is this really interesting mental challenge of just noticing what comes up. It's like a form of meditation.
Yes.
Just kind of noticing the way that my senses change and what I observe around me and what fears pop up of like, oh, is there a mountain lion chasing me or whatever, just all
Right.
these little silly things. So I really actually appreciate and understand what you mean when you say you mentally prepared for it, because it's hard, that's 13 miles a day or whatever. And with that
Right.
much elevation gain, that's no joke in terms of just the physical effort required. But so much of, you're a pretty active person from what I understand. So your body is capable. It becomes
Right.
a mental exercise. What were some of the things you did specifically leading up to it? And then were there like things you were saying to yourself or practices you were using while you were on the trail to kind of stay centered and present with it?
Yeah. Well, I was remembering at one moment when I was in quite a lot of discomfort. I mean, my joints were pretty much giving up. This knee doesn't want to bend anymore. So what are you going to do? And I had to keep moving through discomfort. And I remembered one of my labors. I was thinking about a particularly moment where I was in a lot of discomfort. And I remember thinking, oh, the only way through this is through. It's the only way. The only way through it is through. No one's going to help me get around this thing. I actually have the capacity to do it, and I'm the only one that's going to get myself through it. And also recognizing that everything's temporary. So the sensation is temporary, this discomfort is temporary. And then when I got to the camp and I was so comfortable, I had to recognize this is temporary too. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to get back up and see what these legs can do. And really keeping a positive attitude, because if I just recognized that if I got upset about it, if I attached an emotion to the quote suffering, that it was going to be a lot harder for me. And that was something I was thinking about in advance. How am I going to keep my mood up? And I actually brought some of my favorite herbs and things to that I knew would help me. I brought my AirPods and I had music that my husband and I were walking and talking for a bit, and he wanted to talk about some exciting thing happening in the future that we were going to plan. And he had all this excitement about it. And I was meeting it with like, okay, yeah, He said, you don't sound very excited. I said, right now, I don't have the capacity for excitement. I'm barely able to carry on this conversation. I think I just need to be with myself and my music and be in a meditative state, because any other input is actually distracting away from my one foot in front of the other. So I guess a technique I used was like honesty with myself and communicating that with my team. I had to communicate a lot to them and say, guys, this is where I am right now. This is what I need. I need you to be patient with me and just give me a 5-minute break, a 10-minute break. And just that honesty and communication was extremely important, instead of needing to communicate it through being grumpy, because that's another way we might communicate how we're feeling, is just putting up walls and being real thorny. But I was able to say, hey guys, I'm really struggling. This is what I need right now in order to feel balanced again. So those were some of the techniques I used to get through those hard moments.
I love that. Yeah. It's that inner knowing piece that's so hard to stay in sync with. And you talk a lot about this across all of your work, I think, is this checking in with yourself and being able to recognize these different sensations and needs and emotions and how they connect to our physical presence in the world and all of this. And I'd say probably over the past, I don't know, certainly 5 years, maybe the last 3 has been the first time I've really been able to do that kind of thing. And just say to my wife, like, I can't do that right now. I'm so sorry.
Right.
Like, I love you, but I just don't have the capacity for it. And it has nothing to do with how much I care or anything else. I got to go do whatever. And it's just a totally different way of relating than, being grumpy or frustrated or kind of grunty, which are other ways of being.
It's such an effective and efficient way to be in a relationship too, is to just say, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I need. And, please don't take this personally, because this is actually about my need. And then it just shifts everyone's orientation around it. And it's like you kind of move through challenges with so much more grace.
Right.
Because I recognized in myself and in partnership that we would often communicate our needs through some indirect way. And then once we got through it, we'd recognize, oh, you're tired, you're hungry, you need a break. And having children, I think, helps you get to the meat of things pretty quickly, instead of reacting to their emotional state of imbalance. You might say, oh, you actually need a snack. Let's go right for the solution, instead of getting wrapped up in the noise. And then we can apply that to ourselves as adults and recognize that our needs change. You may have been able to show up in a certain way last week, last month, and now you need something different. And it's okay to say, I'm not actually, this is not in my capacity right now.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, there's so much richness there. It's funny because it sounds so basic. So, my day job is I'm an executive coach, and that's very much like a supporter kind of role. It's being alongside people, seeing them, handling or holding space for their challenges and problems that they're going through, and trying very hard not to carry them myself. And you're in a similar type of role in your work every day. You are a caretaker for people, where it's your job to see people, connect with them, care for them. And for me, I realized that it's both my superpower and my kind of shadow side are the same, one and the same, as it is for many of us, where my caretaking is wonderful and I can see people very, very deeply and like really be with them. But sometimes I don't see myself in that. And I kind of like neglect myself and all of that, where for a long time, I wasn't aware of my own needs and what I actually wanted and desired from my relationships. And so just like the basics of, am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I thirsty? Do I need connection? Just these like fundamental things seem like, well, duh, that's what you need, but that's not what it feels like in the moment.
It doesn't. Yeah. And there's so much wisdom in just connecting with your core requirements.
Yeah, for sure. I really kind of want to break this conversation into two parts, which is symbolic of your book or book set, I should say. A lot of what I hear from you when people have you onto their shows is they want to like extract all the wisdom that you've gained and that you've put into this beautiful 2-volume set that I wish everyone could just have implanted into their brain in terms of the knowledge it contains. But you don't get a lot of chance to tell your story of how you got here oftentimes. And so I really want to spend the first half of this conversation talking about that. And you share a little bit of it at the beginning of your book, where you talk about kind of the early origins of this long-term journey and career that you've built. Kind of began with your dad, actually, and his health journey. And so I wondered if you might just share some about that and how this all began with your dad and his experience.
Yeah, my family of 4, my mom, my dad, my brother, and I were just sort of humming along as a normal family in New Jersey. And then when I was 8 years old and my dad he was young and he was 49, he had a widowmaker heart attack, the kind that most people don't survive. And he survived. And we learned that he had very severe cardiovascular disease and blocked artery. And while I was too young to really understand the impact of that, my whole family's focus shifted. And I would say there's 2 major ways that we shifted. One was we were now oriented around health. And it was health of the 80s. So it was sort of fat-free and some misdirected health guidance, but we were directed towards heart health. And we were also directed towards appreciating him, that we have him, that every day felt like a bonus day. And just recognizing importance of family, mortality, honoring moments as being important and allowing them to have that impact instead of it just being another passing birthday. So I think it started to create a lens for me around empowerment around health and really honoring life. And my mom is a pioneering person. She's not the type of person that outsources her knowledge. She's going to get it for herself. She's going to learn everything that she can. She's going to use her intuition and her wisdom. She created a path for my dad that had him survive and thrive until he was 89 years old.
Wow.
And so she read everything and went everywhere. And our family vacation started to, instead of going to Disneyland, which we did do, we also would go to, my dad would call them fat farms, but they were health spas. And we would learn and we would learn and we would learn. And I think a lot of it was just osmosis. I wasn't necessarily interested at a young age, but then I think I probably did start to get my own interest, because if I look back, it's pretty charming to see some signs that I actually was really interested in medicine and health. In 8th grade, when we did a big capstone project, I decided to do it on the Pritikin diet, which was the 80s heart healthy diet, and this man and heart disease and surgery. And so I started to dip into that. And as I saw my mom's experience of meeting with doctors who knew far less than she did about prevention and about really maintaining heart health, I recognized that there was a whole sea of information out there that wasn't really being taught in the conventional medical model. And my interest in medicine was really, I think it was just a good match for me, just that you can learn forever, that it's a practice, that you keep getting better and better as you get older and wiser. You get to connect with people on a human level and ease suffering, really show people the way that they can remove the obstacles to their own healing and vitality and abundance in their life. And that's pretty much how my medical journey began and formed. And then the creation of my book set and all of that it's really an effort to spread information for more people to be educated so they can take care of themselves. I have a real problem with the concept that the doctor is supposed to be in charge of your health. We are in charge of our health, and we should feel that we have the information to make the right choices for ourselves. And we should have enough insight and internal guidance so we can navigate those choices without asking our doctors or our healthcare providers, okay, what do I do next? Of course, our healthcare providers have a wealth of information and experience, and we should rely on them for guidance and information, but ultimately it's up to our choices, and it's up to us to implement them. Our doctors can't sit there next to us, just drink a glass of water when we wake up or go out for a walk. That has to come from within.
Right.
And I'm inspired to help more people find ways to make those choices easy and fun and accessible. And that's why I wrote my books, because I found that I was writing the same things over and over again to people, creating these really robust treatment plans. And then it started to form for me in my mind that what if everyone just had the information and then they could feel really well resourced to make good decisions and hopefully feel good.
Yeah, there's so much there, so many jumping off points. So I'm going to try and stay disciplined and kind of stick with your story for a while, because I want to get into all of it. Because it's really, and I'll share some of my story on a health journey wise in the second half. But for now, I want to go back to kind of when it transitioned from kind of this like learning by osmosis and picking up just what was happening around you. Because I mean, it sounds like from a place of real love and longing, your mom said, look, I want you around a long time, to her husband, and we're going to orient our life around that, because this was really scary. And what a gift and a show of love and kindness and compassion from her to him. As I hear that story, being a married person, you're married, just thinking about the amount of service involved in that and the amount of care involved in that is remarkable. It's the kind of partnership that you hope for. So there's some real beauty in that story. I wonder for you, when it kind of began to shift from this, like, this is what we do as a family to take care of dad, to, oh, I think I might want to make this my profession. Like, when did you know you wanted to go study this?
It's funny because I think we met with a counselor in our first semester about our interests. And I remember saying, I definitely don't want to go into the sciences because I thought that sounds too hard. So I studied psychology, which of course is a science, but and because people are interesting and human behavior is really interesting. And I loved it. And I started taking some other science type classes just because, I am interested in biology. I love life and earth, and I'm like a real nature person. I was just fascinated, and that kind of just stepped into the next thing. Oh, anatomy, physiology, that seems kind of interesting. And then in my classes, I was just really thriving. I loved the content. And I remember a teacher in my anatomy teacher said to me, so are you going to go to medical school? And I said, oh, definitely not. And he said, why wouldn't you consider medical school? You seem to love this. You're a people person. And I said, oh, it's too hard. I'm not built for that. He was like, who do you think is built for that? Where did you get this idea that you weren't built for medical school? And just that one conversation actually flipped a switch in me. Maybe that is a possibility. And then when I started to explore that more, I realized it wasn't that I wasn't interested in medical school. It was that conventional medicine wasn't a match for me. First of all, the schooling itself, there's a lack of compassion for the medical student. There's just this lineage of we suffer, you're going to have to suffer too. And then you can take care of yourself when you get out in, 4 years plus your residency. Then you can actually start to treat yourself well. And that didn't make any sense to me. If we're putting out doctors in the world, they're supposed to teach people how to take good care of themselves. Why are we making them suffer for all of those years?
Yes.
And why are we only teaching people that there's two solutions to their problems? There's pharmaceuticals and surgery, or the third solution is wait. until it qualifies for one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And then I learned about naturopathic medicine, and that was like a literal aha moment for me, that there was this system of integrating all of the knowledge and of science and the West and that research, and implementing the lifestyle considerations that are done around the world, and that just the fullness of it, and understanding one is a complete organism and not just broken down into organ systems. When I started to learn about the paradigm of functional medicine, integrative medicine, that was a complete match for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a quick, turn. And telling my family that I was going to go to an unconventional medical school was sort of a big moment. I had to sit them down. Listen, it was a coming out. Listen, I want to go to this naturopathic program. There's only 4 in the country. I'm going to move out to Oregon and do this school instead of, going to University of Pennsylvania's medical school, which is, probably where I would have headed. My mom was, I don't know. My dad said, well, just go to get your MD. And then afterwards, if you want to study this functional medicine, this integrated medicine, you can. And I said, I can't do it. I need to be steeping in this philosophy from the beginning. Mm. And sure, it might be a harder road, and I might not make as much money, might not have as much respect, but I know that I'll be true to myself. It was a leap of faith, of course, because everything after that started to fill in and make me realize like why it was that resonant. But, eventually got the support of my family, which was important to me because that was like my foundation, and really never looked back. At this point, I'm 20 years in of practice, and it's luckily the culture has caught up.
Yes.
But that was actually kind of a very pioneering thing to do in 1998 when I started naturopathic school.
Functional medicine, especially amongst my peers, kind of in the startup world and entrepreneurial world, has become kind of the whole deal.
Right.
Especially, kind of core working age, early career, mid-career.
Yeah.
Functional medicine is the whole thing, unless you're truly ill. And it's just been interesting to see how that shifted, even from the time I kind of discovered it to now. So it's been probably 15 years now. Mm-hmm. And there is a massive difference in acceptance, availability, respect, just the whole thing. And you've ridden that whole wave, which is just fascinating to me. And the way that people view your work must have changed so much across that period of time. And I wonder what that's been like for you.
Yeah, there's been stages. So when I first got out of school, I felt I wasn't quite secure that I had the information and the capability of a MD student who was exiting school. I figured there must be major gaps in my education, just logical that there would be. And I started to try to make up for those gaps by consulting with specialists every time I could. So anytime I would get a lab order back, I would call the lab and talk to, they have groups for their doctors. I would go through the lab report and I would, just nitpick, and I would get feedback. Wow, you know your hematology so well. Your training is really strong. Most of my doctors don't understand it to this level. And I say, oh, wow, I didn't realize. Same with the radiologist. I would get a radiology report. I would call the imaging center. Hey, can I talk to the radiologist there to go over this image? And I would just go over it and I would get the same feedback. Oh, I love naturopathic doctors. They're so well informed and they're so curious. And so this just happened over years where I was doing a lot of my own research and recognizing that I actually was really well trained, and that also training doesn't stop after you exit your program. You have to keep diving, you have to keep learning. And I would say the first decade of my practice was research, of course, interacting with patients and supporting them, but always researching. And where I was feeling a little prickly in those first few years, like, I'm a well-trained doctor, you should recognize me as such, I pretty much let that go pretty quickly because, first of all, I don't have a lot of ego around this. There's so much information out there, and you'll attract the people who need you in that moment. And I don't have enough time and energy to
justify
keep up that,
your existence.
Keep that up.
Yeah.
And then after enough years where patients would say, gosh, it took me, I went to 5 doctors before I ever figured out the diagnosis with you. And I just stopped trying to compare. I really respect medical doctors and their training, and especially when it comes into the specialists and emergency care. I don't hesitate to refer. I don't hesitate to consult and work together. Where I find there's gaps is just regular, everyday primary support. And that's where I feel like integrative doctors are maybe more well versed in exploring all the areas of someone's health. I just think it's kind of interesting. I just watch from the sidelines, like, oh, look, cool. This is hot now. This is popular. Oh, this is a health trend that I was taught 20 years ago, and it is being now touted as the newest, greatest. Like, oh, okay, I guess people are catching on to that. Interesting. And now functional medicine is a buzzword. I recognized a couple of years ago when someone said to me, well, are you a functional medicine doctor? And I said, all naturopathic physicians are a functional medicine doctor. That is how we're taught. That is the basis of our education. And while we didn't get a certificate in functional medicine, we actually have our doctor's degree in functional medicine. It was never termed that. A lot of it's just nomenclature that I'm recognizing does apply to the field that I've been in for now a long time. And I'm just kind of like tickled by it. Oh, well, look, where everyone's coming around. People are interested. People are interested in prevention, longevity. These are hot topics now. And it's exciting to be part of it and be able to contribute in a meaningful way. And just to kind of close this up, as I see this conversation going further, people are really interested in the tech part of it and the biohacking and how do we get the most out of our cells and out of this body. And while that is an area of interest for me, my primary area of interest will always come back to the basics of our health. And without those basic structural things, you can't biohack your way out of drinking alcohol every night, eating poorly, and not moving your body. So while it's sexier to talk about that stuff, really the foundation are where it's at. And that's where I always come back to.
Yeah, for sure. It's, again, a lot of jumping off points there, but I think it's fascinating to see the mirroring of the growth of the field with the access to information that people have. And as the internet's increased availability of data and information, I think it's increased fear around people's health, but it's also increased access and people's awareness of, oh my gosh, look at this whole like area of medicine that I didn't even know existed. And this person over here that I trust is saying, run this blood work every year. And my conventional doctor runs like just my hematology or whatever. And that's it. And that's all I get from them, or any number of examples. Mm-hmm. And I think there've been some really important advocates across that amount of time. Zach Bush, who wrote the foreword for your book, or Mark Hyman, or the doctor who wrote the book about garlic and sulfuric foods and all of that, and Rob Wolf and the paleo movement. Like, there's just been a lot of different people who have been out there kind of beating the drum for functional medicine over time. And I see your book being a really important kind of compendium in addition to that, because it's almost like you've taken the entire curriculum of your education, your formal education, those 10 years of deep research, and then all these years of practice, and said, okay, here's the like pedestrian version, not in a patronizing way, but in an accessible way, right? Like, let me give you everything you might want to know.
Right.
And I almost imagine this is like the master document that you go and copy paste from when you're making treatment plans for people. But it's just all available to you. Yeah, I bet it's a wonderful resource to have. So it's just so interesting to me how it's changed over time. One of the things that changed a lot in your life through all of this, though, was you moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. So you went from New Jersey to Portland. Yes. Those are very, very, very different places. I live in Portland too, not too far from you. And it's a fascinating place to live. But before I give you my opinion on it, I'd just love to know, like, what changed about your life when you made that move, and what made you want to stay here when you finished up school?
After living in New Jersey, I went to New Orleans for 4 years. I went to Tulane and just really loved that experience. And then I moved out to Santa Cruz, California. And that was my first experience of West Coast living. I just remember a cute moment of that time for me. I carried around I didn't even have a cell phone. I carried around this little journal I was taking pre-med classes because I hadn't finished pre-med in college. Because I was a psych major, I hadn't done organic chemistry and all that stuff. So I had to do 2 more years of pre-med classes, like a postdoc. And I was living in Santa Cruz, and I had this little notebook, and I was writing down little health tips that I was picking up along the way at the juice shop, the yoga place. And this was all new to me. New Jersey and New Orleans in the 90s were not really places where you would just pick up health information. I just loved it. I couldn't get enough of it. And I was literally learning off of juice menus. Oh, celery's hydrating, and right. Just the connection with nature and health, that what I was feeling was available to me on the West Coast felt like a match. Moving to Portland was really all about the location of the school. I probably would have moved anywhere, just that the right school was living. I had to decide between Portland and Seattle because there's a great school up in Seattle, Bastyr University. And I chose Portland because it just had a little bit more grit to it. The school itself was really rootsy. The teachers were old-time naturopathic doctors who just were willing to fight the fight and promote these medicines. Some are very old traditions that they just weren't being distracted by the white sort of, look and the big buildings. Bastyr University is very nice, beautiful campus. They'd get a lot more funding for research. And I was sort of like, yeah, I want to go to this school, has a little bit more to it. Older men, teachers with long gray hair, they don't, really leave the library much. I was curious about, what's happening over here. And so Portland became a great fit for me. And I went to school for 6 years because I got my master's and doctorate. I did a master's in Chinese medicine in addition to the doctorate in naturopathic medicine. And by that time, I really had grown roots here. And my husband and we got married, and he started his work. And before we knew it, we were planted here, and it was a good place for us. Then it became a place we wanted to raise kids. And, there are a lot of interesting aspects to, living in Portland, but the Pacific Northwest feels like a very kind and generous place to live. I like the 4 seasons. I like that we can pick fruit, vegetables, probably 3 of those seasons right outside of our door. And just the attitude of people that live here was resonant with me in a lot of ways. And it is interesting to practice medicine here because it's pretty popular. So, a lot of times I'm preaching to the choir, which I don't mind. I like that. I don't need to try to convince a lot of people who haven't heard about this for the first time. But I am recognizing that we need more voices in other places. That is also part of my effort, is to be able to share this information and education in other areas that aren't saturated with alternative medicine.
Yeah, it's interesting. I grew up in Atlanta and lived there most of my life, went to the University of Georgia, and then my wife and I moved out here in 2015. Early on in my professional life, I was having just some health challenges, and I started seeking doctors, and I just felt like I wasn't getting what I needed from my conventional kind of primary care doctor that had been my dad's primary care doctor, and that was how I found him. And I think there was maybe literally only one, and this practice was both MD and functional. So they had done both sets of training.
Great.
And it was like the only office I could find that had that available, where they would spend the kind of time with me and the kind of effort with me to help me understand what's going on. And just the testing, the knowledge, the time that I got with them when I would schedule an appointment was so fundamentally different from the 12 minutes I would get with my prior doctor, which is for a reason, and it's systemic, and like I understand all of the things that they don't control. It just really began to transform my understanding of what healthcare could look like. And it reduced my anxiety a lot around what was going on with me, because I could just sit there and ask them the questions that I had on my mind in a way that I felt like my initial doctor would just be like, you have anxiety. That's the thing. We can treat it. You can get rid of it on your own, but I don't know what to do with you. And that was really frustrating, And so Portland, if I bring it back to that, is an interesting place for many reasons, as you mentioned. But one thing that is true about it, it's a good place to be healthy.
Yeah.
to eat at restaurants that cook well and use good ingredients, to explore nature around us everywhere. It's a beautiful place to live. The seasons, as you mentioned, this year it's been like literally right on time, almost to the day our season transitions. And healthcare is much different here in many ways. Even the hospitals here have very different standards of care for things like maternal care as people are giving birth than, for example, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law and what they experience in Atlanta. Just could not be more different, the standards of care that we receive here. And I really appreciate that about this place. Like, you can live healthily here, and it's a pretty commonly accepted thing to, for example, go to a naturopathic doctor and have that be understood, respected, accessible, and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense to me, both why it would be a fit and also why you feel this kind of pull and draw towards, let me continue to educate outside of this place where it's pretty commonly accepted. Atlanta, for example, I think could use even more of that.
Yeah.
So that makes sense to me too.
Yeah. And you bring up a really good point about when you were going to these doctors and you only had 12 minutes and what that system allows for and doesn't allow for. And I think it's really important to note that doctors are probably all well-meaning, well-educated, and have the ability to educate their patients. It's the system that they have been brought up in that affects their ability for that to be translated.
Yes.
You know, if a doctor is seeing 50 patients in a day and they get 12 minutes, they don't have that flexibility to get into it and try to figure out what's causing this issue. I mean, sometimes I actually don't figure out like that missing piece until the very last minute of our hour when we've gone through everything and I say, anything else that you think could be playing into this? And someone will say, well, and they'll say, and that will be the thing. And that happens so often because we get through all of these layers of our own work of how we organize our thoughts and what we have been told is important or not important. And so, anytime that I say anything about a conventional doctor not being able to serve their patient, it's really the system that they're in, because I think individual level, these are smart people, these are caring people. And if they have the opportunity or interest to look into other aspects of health and healing, they would be able to support their patients in that same way. They are part of a system where in medical school, they're often taught if we don't understand the cause, then it's just an unknown cause. If we don't have a treatment, then there is no treatment. And I was taught you always ask why, you always look further. And just having that lens and that way of navigating health is so different. And in a system, you really, they have their standard of care. And if you work outside of that standard of care, it could actually be dangerous for you. You could lose your license. And it's just a very different model that these doctors are being brought up in. And I agree that Oregon has more awareness. The medical doctors, the doctors at OHSU, I've like pretty much only had good experiences with the doctors that I've worked with on behalf of my patients, that I've worked with personally, health. They'll say, I really don't know the answer. You should go talk to one of your colleagues. They might know. And maybe it's because they've been in this environment long enough to see that we can all work together, and we should be working together on behalf of our patients and not have that delineation of, oh, I do functional medicine, I do conventional medicine. It's all just information that should be available to people, and we should approach it that way without the ego and the distinction.
Right. Yeah. That's why I love that integrative term. It just feels like the most complete kind of way of looking at health is it's all related. Sometimes you really do need to have surgery. And that's just the reality of life, right? And so it's not about this versus that. It's actually, how do you across your lifetime and lifespan and risk factors and all of that get the kind of care and support that you need across all the resources available to you. So, okay, there's two more things I want to touch on with your kind of story, because we're both urging to get into the meat of these things, but I just find it so important to capture kind of the paths and ideas and experiences that shape the humans behind the work is why I stay here for so much of this. And so the two more elements are, I see in your book and on social media, there's a lot of photos by the river, and particularly in what looks like a little grassy area or meadow by the river. And I wondered, is that your yard, or is that just a place you spend a lot of time? And yeah, it made me wonder if you live more in like a natural setting and if that's a part of how you've decided to build your life.
Oh, yeah. I live in Southwest Portland near the zoo, so
Okay.
suburbs. Those photos are probably from the Columbia River Gorge, where we have a family home that we visit
Mm,
often. And it's funny that to think of someone looking at Instagram and painting a picture, because I think the picture probably has me out in nature a lot, because that is actually where I feel the most inspired. When I am out in nature, that's when ideas come to me. That's when I feel like, oh, let me post. I'm excited about where I am. And not that I'm not excited about my kitchen and being here in Southwest Portland. That's exciting too. But yeah, nature is an important part of my life. And I try to access it often because I recognize it as something that keeps me really grounded. But you live in Portland, you go 40 minutes in any direction, you can be in some pretty deep nature.
any direction. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's been a really important part of my life here too. My walls have animals and photos of fishing trips and woods. And yeah, my Instagram looks like I'm outside all the time too.
Right.
But if you look at the dates between them, you'll get a
Exactly.
better sense of what's really
Mhm.
happening. But
Mhm.
that's one of the things I love about this place in the Pacific Northwest in particular is, you go south and you're in a river valley that has wine country and all kinds of different exploration. You go east and you're in the mountains. You go west and you're on the coast and in a different mountain range. You go north and there's more mountains, and it's just national and local forests in every direction, and hiking and skiing and
Yep.
fishing and everything you can want for being outside.
Mhm.
And I'm very similar. It's like when I'm outside, things melt away. It's like, oh, wow, maybe we were kind of built to be in nature a little bit more often than we are these days in our
Yeah, the
kind of modern
simplicity
homes
of
and
it.
everything.
You asked me in the beginning of our interview, what did I learn about myself? And something, in addition to the pushing my edges and all of that, I got to experience that being completely immersed in an environment is so fulfilling. Prior to this walk around Mount Hood, just 2 weeks earlier, I was at Burning Man. So desert scape, wild. And when I got back from Timberline, I thought, gosh, I am so much more enriched, fulfilled by being out in nature for 3 days without anything, just stuff on our back and filtering our water as we go, than this fascinating, really inspiring, creative, man made experience out in the desert. And they're different. You can't really compare them. But when I just think about how enriched I felt in nature versus this wild, outward, expansive experience, I like them both, but my nervous system resonates more with that simple experience of
Yeah.
being in nature and just recognizing that more and more, and how that that's medicine that I need to remember is there for me and is there for all of us. I'm always encouraging people to go outside. It seems almost too simple. We are a part of it all, and our energy field wants to reconnect with the earth's energy field, and everything we do to separate ourselves from it kind of separates us from that resonance.
Longtime listeners or consistent listeners will probably get tired of hearing me mention this book, but one of the books that, and of course this was confirmation bias, so I'll just name that up front, but one of the books that has had one of the biggest impacts on me is called The Nature Fix by Florence Williams. I don't know if you've read it, but
I
it's a
haven't.
wonderful
I
book.
think I should.
She cited a lot of great science and studies in there, about some of the common topics we hear about, forest bathing and other things like this. But
Mhm.
the core takeaway I had from the book was basically this prescription, which was every week spend a day outside, or like a half day, something like that, a few hours. Every month spend a full day, and every quarter spend 72 hours,
Yeah.
like disconnected and in nature. I actually am not sure if Florence is a man or a woman. So anyways, they talk a lot about things like the oils that evergreen trees give off and the particles in the air when you're in the middle of a forest, and how basically when you ingest or inhale those, like that alters your state of mind and being, very similar to like an essential oil, which you talk about in your book, and the ways that our nervous systems respond when they get a full 72 hours versus when they get 4 hours. And it was just a really fascinating reflection of what I had experienced, but thought I was just like a weirdo who liked nature. And so it was interesting to see a little more of the like science behind what's happening in my body when my friends and I go on a 3-day rafting trip to go fly fishing and don't have self-service the whole time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, I really love that book, and it very much is in the spirit, I think, of a lot of your work. So for what that's worth, you
Yeah.
might
I
enjoy
always
it
love
too.
when science backs up what we have already experienced intuitively. And then it just makes it even more exciting.
Yeah.
Especially, I'm a pretty left-brained person, but I'm also a very feeling person. And so when I learn about the effects of nature or meditation or being in company with people you love and like the physiologic changes, it just makes me so happy to get that, like, yes, of course. And how cool is that, that our body is just always interacting and responding to our environment. And then when shit hits the fan, which it does, that's when your intuition gets really strong and it says, okay, just go outside. There's nothing for you to do. Just go lay on the ground, go drink a glass of water, close your eyes and just breathe for the next 10 minutes. Things just get so refined and simple when you really need it. I love that people are studying this now. And of course, there's like the flip side of it, that then you then you have someone touting it for just the physiologic benefit, and there's like a little disconnect there. Like, oh, okay, now we're walking barefoot outside just so we get a reduction in inflammation. But like, also, can we please like look around and send a little love to the trees? And
It's like walking around outside barefoot while holding your phone and scrolling Instagram is not the same thing as the intention behind it, right?
Yeah. Which I'm guilty of. 100%.
Yeah, for sure.
Guilty.
Right.
Yes.
And I love that in your book. And you talk about that, I think maybe in the intro. It's like, listen, I send my husband to go get me cheap, not organic mint chocolate chip ice cream late at night on occasion. And so I'm a human being too. And I think that's always just very relatable, right? So one of the themes of the show has become, completely unexpectedly, just perspectives on parenting from people doing incredible work. And I have 2 young boys. They're 4.5 and 2. And I think a lot about how do we raise them such that spending time with us does not feel like punishment, but that it's something that they enjoy. And not that they cling to us, like they have their social groups and but they have balance and they understand the benefits of both. And I couldn't help but notice that having your teenage sons on a 40-mile hike around Mount Hood feels like a bring tears to my eyes gift of the future that I would really love to experience. And I just wondered what you've learned about parenting. And, of course, I don't know the experience. Maybe they kicked and fought the whole way there and they didn't actually want to be there. But it seems like you've built a very enriching, welcoming, loving family environment that make your boys want to spend time with you. And I'm just curious, what have been some of the principles and things you've learned about raising them that have led to that?
Yeah. Honestly, this brings tears to my eyes too, because it feels like the greatest satisfaction in my life that we have teenage boys that are so just comfortable in their own skin and love their family and like just well-adjusted humans. There was so much intention along the way of all the parenting decisions and steps. And obviously it's really about that individual and what they need. So, any parenting advice has to be understood through the lens of like, this is what worked for our unit, our kids, their constitutions, who they are, their likes and dislikes. I think that in the early stages, 2 and 4, it was always about like being together and the household and all the jobs in the house, the cooking, the things. It was a team effort, still a team effort. We are part of this family. We all do what we're able to do. When we were cooking, we always cooked. The kitchen is the center of our home. We would always give the boys jobs. We had one of those learning towers that would push right up to the counter. And even if there was no job to do, I would give them a job. Okay, transfer all of this broccoli from this bowl into this bowl, just one at a time. Just give them jobs and then allowing them to express their independence and creativity by telling us what do they want to do? What do they want to cook? How do they want to do it? Allowing for a lot of mess ups and a lot of mess. It was not about efficiency at that stage. It was really about presence. So when our 2.5-year-old was having a meltdown about whatever it was, like really stopping everything and trying to understand, what is this child experiencing right now? Validating that experience, letting them be sad about it, helping them identify that emotion. You're really sad because we have to leave the park. I know it's hard to leave the park. I'm going to let you be sad about it as long as you need to be sad about it. Do you need a hug right now? Let's talk about what we loved about the park and what we're going to do next time when we come back to the park. Not, I told you we were leaving. We have to go. Your father's waiting for us. Like they can't really get that. But just being there with them, like meeting them where they are at each stage, and just listening and trying to understand, what is it like to be a 4-year-old? What is it like to not get to win the basketball game? What does it feel like? Not how does it feel as a 50-year-old parent and be like, that doesn't matter. You have plenty of basketball games. But yeah, that was really disappointing. You really wanted to win that game. So that empathy, inviting them in for all of the work. And then, I kind of liked the reward system. Okay, guys, we're going to clean up our rooms for an hour and then we're going to make cookies, and just like creating that rhythm. And the reward didn't need to be cookies. It could be, and then we're going to go for a walk. So like to, really, we were like training them to be part of our lifestyle. And it was a match for our kids. There's plenty of kids who aren't going to want to go outside and do the things. And that's some part of just luck. A major thing for us is we did no screens until they were pretty old. And then it was only weekend mornings so we could sleep in. And then it was only weekends. And, they didn't get their phones until 8th grade, which I really wish it was later, but it was no screens because it was just such a slippery slope. We would do family movies because that's fun, but just noticed for the families that were doing a lot of screens that the kids were checking out, and that they would choose to be on the screen instead of help cook or help garden. Or so many times our kids would come up with silly games. And I would say to my husband, if they had video games, there's no way they would be doing this right now. There's no way that they would spend an hour with a tennis racket and a balloon just back and forth, back and forth. That was a big thing. Limiting the screens. And, it's just like evaluating situations after they happen and say, okay, how could we make it better? What can we do next time? And having honest conversations with the kids. We did Waldorf schooling, which I thought was really helpful because it echoed a lot of our philosophies. And I wasn't just having to fight the battle of, well, this kid gets to bring goldfish crackers to school. Why don't I? Of course, that was a privilege to be able to send our kids to have that choice.
Yeah, of course, right.
Yeah, it's all of it. It's wholesome food, some environment. It's listening to them. As far as siblings, because you have 2 boys close in age.
Yeah,
there's gonna be conflict, competition, all that. Like helping them talk through. Like, okay, you guys are really getting at each other right now. What do you think's underneath that? And of course, a 2-year-old might not be able to communicate, but that when our kids were a little older, they started to communicate things like, well, I'm really jealous of you because you're really good at that. Well, I'm jealous of you because you're really good at that. And then, wow, did that flip things when they could communicate that? Then, just a lot of intention, a lot of being present. And as teenagers, recognizing, and I'd heard this from other parents, and now I'm experiencing it. So they don't need you as much. They can do all the things that my kids drive, and they can make their food. It doesn't mean that now our job's done. Like we have to keep re-engaging, just observing and say, hey, how's this going? How's that going? Like stay on top of them so they know that you're present and that you're still holding the container, when they do actually need you. And it's like, oh, here we are. And allowing them to be kids because they can feel like they're supposed to grow up too fast. So encouraging that like silly, childish behavior, like let's get weird, you don't have to be a big kid just because you're 17. We can still do little kid things. And I don't know, it's just a lot of intention throughout. And the foundation for us is like good food, good sleep, good habits. Everything that we do for ourselves, we do for our kids. I am really strict about sleep and good food. And now they are. I don't even have to enforce it anymore. 9:30 at night, my boys are like, oh, it's our bedtime. We got to go to bed. Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it worked out, crossing our fingers. We haven't had those hard teen moments yet. And
Yeah. There's this thing that I take away from so many of these conversations that it goes back to something we talked about earlier, which is almost like fostering the child's inner knowing, fostering their ability to know what they need and to recognize it and to communicate it and to share it and not feel shame around it, whether it's with you, with their siblings. I mean, what a gift to be able to say, like, oh, that feeling I'm feeling right now that's making me want to punch you is I actually feel jealous.
Exactly.
I feel jealous of how good you are at that. And that's really frustrating to me because it's much harder for me. What a gift to be able to say that. And I think back to my teen years and I was a nightmare. And I think I didn't have a sense of inner knowing. I didn't know what was going on with me.
Yeah.
And I probably needed some people in my life to be reflecting that back. And I think that's kind of what I take away from when you share, you still have to be with them, is all of our inner knowing gets out of whack. You'll get off on this path and you'll not realize you're there. And you need someone that loves you to say like, hey, here's what I'm seeing in you right now. I just wanted to check it. Like, are you seeing that? What's going on for you in that? I needed a lot of that. And I did not get it at times because, I was far off the path. So I think a lot about those things. And then when it comes to the screen stuff, I mean, there's some wonderful work being done on this. Jonathan Haidt has done some wonderful work recently on screens and social media and impact on teens and kids. Some new research came out recently that showed that levels of anger in toddlers are directly correlated to amount of time spent on screens, that their ability to modulate their anger declines the more time they spend on screens. I found that really interesting. We've seen that in our kids. So there's just so much of this stuff that as time goes on and technology is more accessible, that is just going to be a challenge, I think, for how parents manage it. And I think it requires a lot of intentionality, to your point.
Kids are so different now. They're being raised in such a different environment with so much information and access. And I honestly don't know how to help my kids through certain things because they're in such a different world than I was. And the younger kids, it's going to be even more different for them. Yeah. What you said about helping them identify their feelings and their needs, I think that's really one of the most important things that we can do as a parent. Just reflect. I'm noticing that you seem really frustrated right now. Do you need anything? Does your body need anything? And then they I'm hungry. Or, this thing that happened earlier in the day really upset me. Just that little mirror. I'm noticing this. And it gives them that opportunity. And I wish I had that opportunity too. I think I didn't learn that until much later age. And for me, there was some shame around certain emotions. I remember at a young age being told to turn the tears off. Crying just wasn't acceptable, wasn't allowed in that moment. And I remember saying to myself, I will never tell my kid to stop crying. Never, ever, ever. It's always welcome.
Yeah, I had to learn to cry as an adult. I mean, it sounds absurd, but as an adult and as a man, it was like, don't cry. That's not acceptable. Stop it. I remember the first time I saw my dad cry, I think it was when his dad died. And that was really powerful for me because it was like, oh, wow, you do have tears in there, huh?
Right.
And for how many years have you had to repress them until finally you hit this moment of you really are sad and it's got to come out.
Yeah.
So it's been a really powerful skill, honestly, to learn to let myself cry. And the other one was anger, is I noticed how often anger is not accepted. And I think that's because most people's experience with anger is dangerous.
Right.
It is attached to dangerous circumstances. And so it becomes scary. But anger properly expressed is the most healthy and normal thing in the world. Everyone gets angry basically every day at something.
Yeah.
And it's about learning ways to communicate and be with it without it becoming dangerous. That's the thing. A lot of this starts getting into the world of my work and how I work with entrepreneurs to start noticing this stuff. Because entrepreneurs sometimes do things like yell at their teams. And it's that's a really interesting response. What's going on there? And sometimes it's well, I was feeling really angry. Okay, well, you don't have to yell to communicate your anger, right? What are some other ways we could process that and deal with it?
Do you have any tips that you can think of that you would communicate to both adults and to younger people about expression of anger? That sounds really interesting to me.
Well, the first thing that I've noticed is that almost always anger comes from need being encroached on or challenged or unmet, whatever that need might be. It's like, as an entrepreneur, you might need your team to actually deliver on their job. And maybe someone's not. And maybe that legitimately makes you angry. That makes sense to me. I've used as the like baseline teaching tool or framework, the nonviolent communication framework, because it just gives people a structure for doing it that can kind of become like, it's almost like as you teach the pillars of health. Do people walk around every day thinking, okay, my pillars of health, what am I going to do today? No, of course they don't. But at the beginning, it's helpful. It's like, okay, I got to sleep, I got to have nutrition, like the pillars. With nonviolent communication, it's basically just 4 steps. It's facts or kind of like indisputable circumstances that if I say, Dr. Erika and I had a phone call at 10 a.m. that lasted 2 hours and it was for a recorded podcast conversation, those are all facts. Like, we're not going to argue over that part, right? The second part is your emotions in response to the facts. So I noticed I was excited and a little nervous. And then as the conversation flowed, I got comfortable and settled in. Like, that's what was going on inside of me. In this case, it would be I was feeling angry after that situation happened, if we're talking about anger. And then the third step is, what's the need underlying that emotion? So in our conversation today, it's like, my need is, well, I want it to go well. I want to really like highlight your work and I want people to enjoy it and to want to listen to it. And then the last step is making a request. So in the case of anger, what often happens is I felt angry and the need was, well, I need to know that the newsletter is going to go out every week because that's that person's job. And so my request might be, hey, Tony, if you can't get the newsletter done, I need at least 24 hours notice so that I can adjust and make sure that I can make up for that. And occasionally, that's okay. Like, I know life happens, but pretty consistently, I need to know that you've got it. So is there anything you need from me to make that possible? And now we're in a conversation, whereas a lot of times what happens is like, well, what the, why didn't the newsletter go out? And I can't believe that all these errors were in it. Why didn't the link work? And what does that do? Well, it just provokes shame or guilt or fear in the other person. And now they're in their reactive state too. And you've got 2 reactive states going on that you just can't cope. No one's operating from a place of agency at that point.
I really like that, how it takes the emotion, and because I think a lot of people might think, oh, anger needs to be expressed. It needs to be discharged with the volume that you feel it. But you're actually talking about transmuting it into action and mutual understanding. So it discharges through, it's like more of a grounded discharge instead of this like big outward energy. It's like, well, I'm feeling this, but it's because of that. And here's the strategy. So I don't have to feel that anymore. And you actually still feel the release of it, but without the injury.
The other side of it though, which is the physical expression, which is like that's really more of a fear thing that sometimes comes out as anger for people, where if your fear response gets triggered and you're in that kind of fight or flight mode, but you're in a business situation, for example, and what you end up having to do is freeze. Freeze is a actual trauma response. And so what you do need to do is find a way to discharge the energy at some point. Like if you were in a business meeting and getting yelled at, for example, you're on the receiving end of someone's anger. And maybe you grew up with a parent who yelled at you a lot, and that sometimes became abusive. So this is you're experiencing actual trauma response because your boss is yelling at you. You're going to probably have a freeze response because it's not acceptable to do anything else. Like running away is not acceptable. Fighting obviously is not acceptable in that context. As I understand it, I'm still at the amateur level of like trauma processing. The best way to handle that is as quickly afterwards to kind of like recall the situation and bring up those same feelings that you were having. And then depending on which urge you have, whether it's fight or flight, to like actually act out I'm going to go for a run now and recall the sensation that I was having, or I'm going to go kick a punching bag for a minute to satisfy the fight urge, so that you don't freeze your nervous system in that freeze trauma response, which is the one that gets stuck in your body. And so if you think about like the body keeps the score. Peter Levine is like the godfather of trauma research. He's got a series of books about this. Like that's how the pain and all of that gets embodied, is you get stuck in the freeze response. So anyways.
I love that. Do you ever do the Qigong shaking practice?
Ooh, I have. So I got introduced to Qigong through my coach training. And this has been where a lot of my understanding of like embodied trauma and all of that has been really helpful. But I don't know if I specifically do that, but I do a lot of the like jumping and just kind of like reset type stuff because we're made to shake basically.
Right.
And animals have a shake response. So you probably know a lot of this stuff. And so like when you see a dog doing their shaky thing, a lot of times they're shaking off emotion as we would understand it. So it might be fear or stress or whatever. And we don't, it would look weird if you were in the middle of a meeting, or we think it would look weird if you were just like, okay, let me
and have to do it
shake
anyway.
all this off. Yeah.
Weird.
But I know you promote this a lot, is this kind of like ability to move and shake a little bit. So what's behind that for what you've learned?
Well, I did, in part of my Chinese medicine training, we got certified in Qigong.
Okay.
And a practice that we would start every Qigong session with was for 5 minutes or so, just shaking, full body shaking. Start with the hands and wrists, and it's just what you were doing, but we do it for longer, get every limb, get everything. And afterwards, you just come to a place of rest and you feel your whole body vibrating. And I learned about it in school, and it was just kind of fun. And then I started to recognize when my body would ask me to do it. I've done it in restaurant bathrooms because I was sitting at the table and got really angry or upset or triggered by something that was said. And I went to the bathroom and I was like, what kind of splash water on my face? I'm like, no, I'm actually going to shake it out. And I shake it out, shake for a minute, and then I am better. And this is something that I taught my kids. Like, okay, let's shake. Okay, everyone, there's a little bit of prickly, energy here. Let's see, can we shake it out? And we shake. And actually have the exercise all detailed in the book so people can see or take themselves through the steps of the Qigong shaking. And you don't have to be a Qigong practitioner. You don't have to be that able-bodied to just move things around, because emotion does get caught in our body.
Yeah.
And simple practices, taking a run, a walk, shake your body, a breathing exercise will transform it so beautifully.
It's a great kind of bridge to the second half of our conversation, a little less than the second half. So I'm going to invite us to just take a break for a moment. But when we come back, I want to focus our time on really health in the context of entrepreneurship. You talk a lot about having Nike clients and Intuit clients and just this kind of modern culture of work and stress that we find ourselves in. And I find that entrepreneurs are often even like another level beyond that, because they feel like the weight of the world's on their shoulders, and they've got the financial needs of their family, financial needs of the business and their employees. And so it just breeds an environment of many times unhealth, unless we can develop practices like after a pitch meeting or after a webinar, like shake for a minute and let go of some of that energy you were just carrying that was so tense through all of that. And so I want to run through just kind of some of the things that I took away from your book, and that I've seen, some of them I've seen work for me. Some of them I'm still curious about in the context of entrepreneurship right after this. Hey, it's Barrett. You've reached about the midpoint of this conversation. And while we take a little break for station identification, as they say, I want to tell you about two things. First of all, I write a newsletter every Saturday for founders and creators who are leading teams and companies to make an impact through your work. It has 3 sections in it. The first one is a mini essay from me based on my executive coaching work with founders and creators about how to lead well. It has 3 long-form essays or links from around the web that will help spark new thoughts to help you lead better. And it has 1 quote from a meaningful book that I often find myself recommending to friends and clients. All the feedback I've gotten so far is that it hits exactly on the kinds of issues that founders, CEOs, and creators are facing every day in their work. So if that sounds appealing to you, make sure to go to my website at barrettbrooks.com, and you can subscribe right at the top of the homepage. That's BARRETTBROOKS.com. The second thing I want to tell you about is that my day job, I actually do have a day job, I'm not just a podcaster yet, is as an executive coach, as I just mentioned. I work with founders of Series A startups and later, and with creators who are doing at least $1 million as a solo founder and are now thinking about growing a team. The uniting commonality between the founders and the creators I work with is that you've reached a point in your business where you know you're going to make it. Actually, you're doing quite well. And now the question is, how much do you want to scale? And what are the leadership challenges that you're going to face along the way? This work is based on both my training as a coach and in my work as an operator and growing my old company ConvertKit from $3 to $30 million in annual revenue. If you're a founder or creator who might benefit from coaching, or if you know someone who's looking for a coach, I'd love for you to check out my site and my coaching page at barrettbrooks.com/coaching. You can learn everything about how I work as a coach and also fill out a form to have an exploratory conversation if that sounds interesting to you. All right, that's all I got for you right now. There's no sponsors for the show at the moment, so consider me your sponsor. Let's get back to the conversation for the second half. Okay, we're back. And as I said, I want to kind of do a version of this, which is like, imagine, in some ways, I'm imagining me like 5 years ago showing up to, or 10 years ago showing up to my doctor's office. But I want to imagine we have an entrepreneur, they're running a company, maybe they have a team, they're doing some revenue, levels of stress are extremely high. They probably work long hours. They probably have a family at home. And they're starting to feel the effects. Maybe there's various ways that it's coming out, but just they can tell they're not at their best. And so I want to try and take some of the stuff in this beautiful volume, which on YouTube you can see the beautiful volume 1 of the 2-set book, which is 20 years of wisdom packed into a volume, and say, okay, what are the basics here? The first thing I wanted to start with is if you got a patient and that's kind of in this situation, and really they're just wanting to support like whole body health. There's nothing, there's no major disease present, but it's like longevity, health, sustainability of their lifestyle. What are some of the kind of questions and diagnostics that you're focused on early on to help someone, not just for you to understand where they're at, but to help them understand where they're at with their physical well-being?
First, we start with a lot of conversation. So I try to understand and help them understand where they might have some gaps or blind spots. And on my intake form, there's a section where it assesses all different areas of your life where you give a 1 to 10 scale of satisfaction. 10 is you're completely satisfied. I ask about relationships, physical activity, spiritual growth, finances, all these different aspects that impact us greatly, but maybe wouldn't come up in a doctor's visit. That tells me a lot, because so sometimes people might be 99991, right? Okay, so I'm not a marriage counselor. I might not be able to help them in their relationship, but I can help them understand how this is drawing energy away from their body and their health and their well-being. So first is that reflection of what is your sense of well-being? What would you like to be spending more time doing? How would you like to feel? And just giving them that opportunity to do a little inventory. So my intake form is very lengthy because I really want them to have that reflection, that mirror. So we're assuming that this is a healthy person who is just feeling maybe like they're burning the candle at both ends. And they're starting to feel that tightness a little bit.
Yeah, maybe it's like they're run down. Maybe they're getting some like occasional like heart palpitations or anxiety, or like maybe some muscle tension, body pain.
Yeah.
It's like they're feeling it, but it's not acute, I suppose.
Yeah, it's nothing diagnosable yet. It's some sense of unrest and dis-ease, like, oh, I'm getting sick more often, or my back hurts more often, or my sleep's not quite as solid as it used to be.
Exactly.
That sort of thing. So first I'm going to look at all of those things and see if there's something that jumps out that is an obstacle to something else falling in line. So if someone tells me, I'm just not really sleeping very well, then we're going to put a lot of effort into assuring that good sleep. So all the sleep hygiene stuff may introduce some nutrients like magnesium or herbs to ensure solid sleep, because without solid sleep, you can't repair, brain can't function. You're not going to do a lot of things that you need to do. If that person's body is telling me that maybe they have a little bit of mineral deficiency, like you mentioned, like some cramps, or, just kind of, maybe after a run, I'm a little bit more sore. Well, the stress of their day-to-day living is probably actually utilizing a lot of their nutrient store. So I'll try to make sure that they're hitting their nutrient needs. We're going to go through diet, and we're going to go through possible supplementation. Sometimes it's as easy as, oh, I notice you're not having breakfast, or you're not having protein with breakfast. Let's make sure you get protein at each meal to keep your blood sugar stable. And let's have you do some electrolytes midday to keep your mineral levels up and keep your energy going through the rest of the day. A lot of times it's minor adjustments. It's not this big thing. It's that they're not actually meeting their body's needs, and their body's needs change when they're under acute stress. And then it starts to pile up a bit. And of course, there's the aging process, which is a moving target as well. So I'm going to have them reflect on all the basics: sleep, hydration, nutrition, potential additional nutrition like the micronutrient piece, movement, rest, connection, communication. Are they being honest with themselves and what they want in their life? Or are they just feeling so stifled that they can't really, they're no longer playing guitar, and they used to play guitar every day and they love that. Okay, how can we get you playing guitar 10 minutes before bed? Just finding what are those little missing pieces. And a lot of times, I feel like all I'm doing is holding up a mirror and asking the right questions, and they leave there saying, oh my gosh, you're right. I used to exercise all the time and I'm not doing that anymore. How can we build a strategy around that? And these are smart people that fit a lot into their day, and they actually probably can fit in 40 minutes of movement. It might look a little different. It might not be the luxurious, Soul Cycle class they used to go to. Maybe it's just a walk around the neighborhood, listening to a podcast or taking a meeting on the go. Or maybe it's a 20-minute video in their living room. It's not necessarily going to look like what it used to look like, but how can we find times and ways to bring these habits back in? And a lot of times I just teach people to stack a habit on top of another habit, or plan a few hours a week where they're dedicating to exercise. Okay, every Saturday at 2, mama leaves the husband with the kids and she goes to her yoga class or whatever that is. And you have to schedule it like you would your most important meetings. And that can go for meditation, that can go for time with friends, whatever it is that's missing. There's usually a spot for it. It might not be as, wonderful, but it can still happen. And just trying to help people realize they don't have to do all of it all the time, but weaving in self-care and these pillars little by little, it does add up, and it does make you feel more complete and more rested and ready to be productive. And then lastly, sometimes more boundary around what you are willing to do in a day, what is realistic for you to do, and changing that structure of what you think you need to do in a day in order to feel productive. Maybe you need to dial it back because it's not working for you. So sometimes that looks like delegating. Sometimes that looks like saying no. Sometimes that looks like hiring more support, talking to a boss and saying, I'm no longer able to do X, Y, and Z. And sometimes it means accepting the things that you are not addressing right now, that you recognize, I am choosing not to address this right now. And so you feel empowered in it. Instead of it just all happening to you, you can say, I am choosing not to address my relationship issue right now. It's too much to take on, but this is a choice. I'm making a choice not to address this at the moment. And I hope I have the space to do so another time. It's a lot, and it's so individualized.
Of course,
that's
right.
The piece. Yeah.
Yeah. And everyone's got a different flavor. I have this joke that I'll say to my wife sometimes where one of us will go to a doctor, or a friend will tell us about a medical issue they're having. And it's like, yeah, doc, I'm feeling really anxious all the time and I can't sleep at night and this and that and this and that. And you talk about some of the pill culture and things like that. So, can you just solve it for me? And, you go through the whole survey and diagnostics and what's going on. And they'll be like, well, how much coffee do you drink every day? It's
Right.
Four or five cups.
Exactly.
And, it's not a big deal. And in Portland, 4 or 5 cups is it's very, very a lot of caffeine.
Yes.
And, I can say this because this is my problem sometimes.
Yeah.
And doctor's like, well, have you considered cutting back on caffeine or maybe eliminating it and trying what that's like? And it's like, oh, no, definitely not. Can't do that. No way.
Right. Yeah. So, you're choosing to continue that coffee. Yeah. Sometimes it is that obvious. I've definitely had that conversation with someone who has anxiety and heart palpitations. Like, how much coffee are you having? 4 cups. Let's try 2. How would that look? Yeah.
Yeah. And there's this fascinating, the biology of some of these things is sometimes simple. Like you said, It's like, well, are you getting 8 hours of good sleep, good quality sleep? Are you getting the hydration that you need, which is its own challenge these days of Are you absorbing the hydration? And
Right.
how does it relate to things like coffee and caffeine intake and alcohol and
Mm-hmm.
all of that? Are you moving? But there's such a big psychological element to all of this. It's
Yes.
not just go to bed at this time for many people. It's
Yes.
not just drink more water. There's like these psychological hangups to it. And if I could like
Yes.
prescribe every entrepreneur, which would be a huge privilege, it's like, well, I'd love you to have a naturopathic doctor with great referral network. I'd love you to have a great psychotherapist who's got excellent
Right.
training in one of these modalities that really works for breaking down some of this stuff. And I'd love
Mm-hmm.
you to have a coach.
Yeah.
That would be amazing, right? You'd have the
Yes.
support that you need because those
Yeah.
are all interrelated things. And so I guess the question that comes out of that is, how do you see the psychology around some of this stuff impact the biology of it and people's ability to tackle that side of things?
Yeah, it's huge. We are often our own biggest obstacle. So a lot of times I will ask someone if everything I'm recommending is being met with a response that it's going to be hard and here's the reason, they come up with their own. I will often repeat back to them what their stated goal was. Okay, so you've told me that you would really like to lose weight. And when we talk about nutrition, it's going to be really hard because, you're feeding two kids and usually just eat what's left on their plate and you haven't really found time for exercise and your knee hurts and you're not sleeping well enough. And so we have a lot of obstacles to getting you into a state where your body will actually release some weight. If you were advising a friend who was in this state, what would you advise them to do as the next step? And then they can often get a different perspective. And they'll say, I would say, you got to just figure out how to make a pot of soup every Sunday and eat that for lunch instead of your kids' leftover grilled cheese. And sometimes they start to be able to see outside of themselves. And I will also say, listen, I'm giving you the recommendations of what I think could help you, but you're a grown-up and you get to decide for yourself what you're willing to do and you're going to do. And sometimes when they recognize that it's actually their choice, they will change a behavior. I also will recommend that they do the easiest change that is most appealing. So when they say they want to get moving more, that they're going to start to play tennis again. They haven't played for 10 years. So, okay, great. You want to play tennis again. There might be a few steps between now and you playing competitive tennis again. What is the easiest first step that you can imagine doing that you would enjoy doing? Like, well, if I could just get out and walk every day, then I could maybe get closer. Like, okay, let's do that. So I guess the concept of like, don't let great be the enemy of good enough, or whatever that saying is, like, allow things to be good enough. Take that first step, even if it's not where you totally want to be. You can take the first step and then the next steps get easier and good habits start to build on themselves. I think as a busy entrepreneur or parent, we tend to go for perfection and it's an all or nothing sort of thing, but it can't be all or nothing. So drink a glass of water and go for a 5-minute walk. You've done something good.
Yeah.
And let those things build and stack. 5 minutes at a time will add up over the day. I cut vegetables literally 5 minutes at a time. I finish with a patient. I have my clinic adjacent to my home, so I have this privilege. But I come in the house and I chop up veggies and I'm like, that was 5 minutes. How can I spend these 5 minutes in a meaningful way? Can I do some deep breathing for the next 5 minutes? Can I drink water for the next 5 minutes? Can I stretch? Can I walk? I like this idea of small increments of self-care. Getting out of our own way is really hard. We are definitely masterminds at protecting our hard-earned habits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes they're protecting little versions of us inside too. They're coping tools that we built over a long period of time. They're hard to unwind. One of the analogies I use with entrepreneurs, especially people in the startup world where it's really high octane, there's a lot of money on the line, is that the amount of stress and brain energy that they're putting into every day of their life is not that dissimilar to a professional athlete in terms of just the amount of stress and load that's going on to their being. And it comes in different forms because an entrepreneur tends to be sitting, whereas an athlete tends to be moving, and those create different pathologies, if you will. This is a little bit counter to what you were just saying, so I don't want to take it to like, and therefore you must be perfect. But I try and use that as a way to reflect back to people the understanding that like the amount of work that you're putting in might actually require 10 hours of sleep.
Exactly.
Because what your brain and body need on the other end of a full day of meetings and pitches and performance management and whatever else is like rest and really clearing it out. And what you're doing instead is you're going and having a drink with friends or like working until midnight and sleeping 4 hours and getting up and doing it again. And it compounds over time. So I noticed that what a lot of people that come to me for coaching are experiencing is some combination of stress, very high stress, probably adrenal fatigue, constant cortisol coursing through their system just because they're in this state of reactivity all the time. So what are some of these like easier starting points for managing that high level of stress, the adrenal fatigue type stuff? Like what are some of the tools that entrepreneurs can use and just make use of?
Well, I think one thing is what you just said about treating yourself like an endurance athlete, because you are. Don't think for a minute that your body can sustain what you used to give it when you weren't doing this. When the adrenals are really tired, the body needs more frequent meals. It actually wants glucose and protein and fat like every 3 to 4 hours. So just having some strategy around that, smoothies or a big stew with all the things. This is not a time to also try to eat keto or paleo. Like the body probably really does want some of those carbohydrates for brain fuel. So eating regularly, drinking water and electrolytes regularly to keep those minerals going so the cells can talk to each other. Taking brain breaks. So this is 3 to 5 minutes where you close your eyes and you just breathe and you let your brain, your glial cells actually get cleaned up a little bit, because you're just actually using so much mental energy that the brain starts to fatigue. And just by closing the eyes and decreasing all sensory input for 3 to 5 minutes, you're gonna have a nice reset. Taking 5-minute walks, 10-minute walks, doing a set of lunges, push-ups, getting your blood circulating. So if you have been sitting all day, you're literally not getting enough brain flow to your brain. So if you have a break, you get up, you move. I have my son doing handstands in between classes, which he does all over school to get blood to his brain, which is something he discovered after a concussion, that he was having a lot of trouble focusing. And if he would go out in the hall and run laps or do squats, push-ups, handstands, he would get blood to his brain and he would feel better. And now he's utilizing that. Even now he's not having concussion symptoms. So quite literally getting blood to your brain. There's a whole book about it called Spark. It talks about how exercise increases cognitive function, even short bits of it. And then recognizing what you cannot control. So much of our stress is around what we feel like we are supposed to control. And if something is out of your control, that is when you say, oh, well. If I can take action on it, yes, put energy into it. If I cannot take action on this, it has to be put in the bucket of, oh, well, it's not worth my energy to worry about this because I can't actually shift it, but I can shift the way I feel about it.
I love that part. And exercise I'll sometimes do with clients is really helping them play out. Like, what is that kind of worst case in some cases, or the things that are out of your control, and what might happen if that comes to pass? Just really letting them like say all of it.
Get as far into it as they can.
Exactly. Like define it for me all the way. Yeah. And it's like, all right, sometimes we'll do an odds type thing. Like, what's the probability of that version, and then what's the probability of a more likely in the best case? But even if we don't do that and they just play out the worst case, and I say, all right, and so let's say that is right now, that's just happened. Mm-hmm. What would you do? Would you be okay? Do you think that you would be able to make it? Yeah. And they're like, yeah, I mean, it would suck, but I would be okay. I would figure it out. And it's like, okay, so, you don't have control. Yep. You have to let it go. And if that happens, that thing that's out of your control, that would suck a lot, you're going to be okay. Yeah. All right, let's move forward, Right. Perspective shifts. Mm-hmm. I have a trick that I do, and I always have to remind my husband of this one. So something goes not planned. Let's say you made a pitch for a thing and you didn't get it. You ask yourself, okay, and you're really upset. Am I going to be upset about this in a year? The answer is no, I won't even remember this happened. Okay, how about a month?
Probably not. How about a week? Yeah, I would have moved on. How about tomorrow? Well, if you know you are going to let go of it easily in a week or maybe even 48 hours, like, can you let go of it now? Can you already know that in 2 days from now, it's going to be in the rearview mirror?
Right.
So maybe you can just allow yourself not to have to go through all the pain right now, or be in the pain. Just like dive in and wallow and like really, like allow yourself to be really upset because you put a lot of time and effort into that. So be upset. Take that time, go for a walk and shed a tear, call a friend and be really upset. And then say, okay, I'm going to put my pants back on and bootstraps and do it again.
Just be sad for a minute.
Just be
we're
sad.
so bad at being sad. It's
Just
like,
be
damn,
sad,
I'm
be
really
pissed.
disappointed that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So long or so often when it's hanging out with us for a long period of time, it's because we haven't actually let ourselves feel the thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like, man, I really, really wanted to partner with that venture fund or whatever.
Yeah.
And I feel really sad that they didn't. Oftentimes what it becomes is like, oh, that's a chip on my shoulder and I'm going to go show them.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, maybe, but also you're sad. And admitting that sometimes for like a person who is type A, in control, wants to change the world is like, well, that sounds stupid. And it's like, well, I'm just telling you what it takes to be able to move through these things,
feel really sad. Talk about it and feel it. It's very powerful.
It is indeed. One of the other things that I notice in clients is caffeine, sugar, alcohol, sometimes even like Adderall and things like that are tools that people use to try and shortcut some of these other things that we're talking about. It's like, if I just drink more coffee or I use sugary stuff to fuel myself or I have a drink to calm down because I've been drinking too much coffee or whatever, are very understandable ways of managing. And there have been ways I manage at times.
Very understandable. Yeah.
How do you help someone approach maybe if they want to kick one of these things? It's like, I don't want to be as reliant on sugar, or I only want to drink a day a week or on celebratory occasions. What are some of the tools for kicking some of these things that they do become legitimate fuels for the body? They're just not good for us. And there are better ways of getting at it.
I think first, just having people be curious about it, recognizing, oh, look, this is an interesting pattern. Maybe I drink more than I think I should or would like to, XYZ. Taking the shame out of it, taking the word should out of it. I know I shouldn't drink alcohol. I know I shouldn't eat sugar. I just take the word should out. Okay. It's what you're doing. You would prefer to do something else. You probably would feel better if you did something else. So how can we start to build strategy around it? If someone's like, I just love my morning coffee. Okay, great. Let's not get rid of that coffee unless we know it's a real problem. It's giving them heartburn or anxiety. But maybe the 3 cups is too much. Could we try 2? Could we try 1 and 1 cup of green tea? So starting to trade off. If you need that caffeine to get going, maybe you don't need as much, or maybe a different form would be helpful. If we recognize that we're using sugar as a fuel, usually the body needs more food. So protein and fat. So if you're going for a candy bar, have an apple with nut butter, have hummus and carrots, like just trying to trade out. Sugar is usually you're actually hungry or you're wanting a dopamine boost. It's really common for our dopamine to be drained if we're working really hard all the time. And you can also just recognizing that you can get dopamine in other ways. So just doing like 5 minutes of breathing or taking a walk will give you a dopamine boost. And just recognizing that like, oh, my body's wanting a little dopamine right now. I'm going for sugar, but what could I do instead? I could drink a glass of water, have a snack, and take a 5-minute walk. That probably will do the trick. If someone has a habit, like they're drinking soda, I'll ask them, okay, what is it that you want? Is it the caffeine? Is it the sugar? Is it the fizziness? Is it just the fun reward? And they usually find that they can switch out some other habit. Like, okay, I'll just have a fizzy water drink that isn't soda. Like, how can we replace habits with something that is more favorable? With alcohol, I'll usually say, okay, how many nights, how often? What do you think would be ideal for you? How could we start to shift that behavior? How about just on the weekends? Or how about you drink a glass of water between every glass of alcohol? And just some strategy around that. Deciding before you go out how much you're going to drink. Because if you say in advance, okay, I'm only going to have 3 drinks, you're more likely to do that. But if you just start drinking, by the third drink, you won't be able to make that decision in the same way. You're like, I'll have a fourth. But trying to decide in advance what that plan is can often help people. And then also, like if they're adrenal fatigued, they're reaching, or dopamine deficient, they're reaching for these things as medicines. They're treating their body, right? So recognizing, okay, my adrenals are probably zapped. You could probably use some B vitamins. You could probably use more sleep. You could probably use some electrolytes. All of these things will help stabilize. Maybe some ashwagandha before bed to help you ease into bed. Maybe using some CBD or cannabis instead of alcohol as another, it's a tool, but maybe it has less of a negative effect on you than many drinks would when you wake up the next day feeling kind of crappy. You had too much to drink. I get into my book quite a bit about adrenal fatigue and how to support the adrenals. The adrenals really like a certain lifestyle. They like rhythm. They like food regularly. They like lots of minerals. The B vitamins and magnesium come up to the top as their favorite nutrients, and just, supporting the body in that way. And then those cravings are not as big because your body doesn't need it quite as much.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the electrolyte and mineral thing is really fascinating to me for a long time, and I still struggle with this. I noticed that there's a relationship for me between the more coffee I drink, the less my body is able to absorb water when I drink water, and it just moves through me. I don't know. I really should not drink as much coffee as I do, and I know this, and I am making the choice to your point, because of small kids and work and everything else.
Right.
But one of the things that I noticed was I definitely absorb water better when it has electrolytes or salt in it. And you talk a lot about this, that
I do.
The state of our water, we aren't able to absorb it sometimes for a variety of reasons. And I was reading the little sidebar on, like, if you're noticing you drink a lot of water and you pee a lot, but you're still always thirsty, like you might have some toxicity stuff going on or whatever. And I want to get into toxicity here in a moment because of how much we take in the modern environment. But you say high quality electrolyte powder a lot. And I wonder if there are any particular brands that you really like for electrolyte powder, because it's so hard to differentiate between things when you're just looking at marketing messages all the time.
Right.
Because I noticed a massive difference when I add salt or electrolyte mixed to my water and how thirsty I am versus when I'm just drinking water.
Right. Yeah. So the reason why I make recommendations around electrolyte rich water or beverages is because when you drink water with those minerals in it, it breaks up the surface tension of the water and it allows it to penetrate into the cells more efficiently, more effectively. That can look like a pinch of sea salt in your water. It can look like a pinch of salt and a splash of juice, a natural, any juice that doesn't have added sugar. You can do honey and salt and fruit juice. You can do cucumber water. You can mash up some watermelon. All these things are electrolyte rich. I just want people to know that you don't just have to buy an electrolyte product. You can get electrolytes from your fruits and vegetables. In fact, that should be your primary source of electrolytes. Cucumbers, celery, lettuce, apples, oranges. Those are sources of electrolytes. And then you add a little salt in for a little extra staying power of your liquid. There's a lot of products on the market, and even the worst ones, I don't have too much of trouble with. But I do like the Jigsaw brand, and I like the brand that's the Lyte, Lyte, I think it is. It has no sugar in it. So I usually recommend that people choose one without sugar. Now, for kids that are like athletes, they actually need some sugar in there. I'm not saying white refined sugar. Like for my kids, I'll have them do, maybe 1/3 fruit juice and 2/3 water and a couple pinches of salt. And that is an electrolyte drink. The glucose runs out, especially for athletes. If you're doing any sauna therapy, sweating, hot yoga, all of these things are going to deplete those minerals and should be replaced. Long distance runners and just marathon workers, sitting at our computer all day, our glucose levels are going to go down. So we can benefit from a little bit of the sugars in there. So from fruit or honey, or even some of the products that have like beet sugar in them or some sort of fructose is fine too. There's a lot of good brands out there, and the less ingredients, the better. No food colorings ever, ever, ever. You're not deficient in food dye. I can promise you that. And something that tastes good that you enjoy. That's important too, that it's not just a miserable experience to get these things down. You can dilute them as much as you need to get to the desired flavor.
Okay, so something that I think is probably widespread, but I know has also been a challenge for me is detox pathways. And the more sedentary I got, the more I worked, the more coffee I drank, and just all these things added up to where my body was not detoxing in the ways that I needed it to. And this was showing up in different lab work. Regardless of my particular countenance, we ingest a lot of stuff in the modern environment. Glyphosates from conventional food, microplastics have become an increasingly concerning area of study right now, PFAS and all of the forever chemicals. BPA, of course, was very common for a long time. All of our food packaging and processing, we're just ingesting a lot of stuff that in a natural kind of pre-modern environment, we wouldn't be ingesting. The good news is our body is well equipped to help us process a lot of this stuff, even though ideally we're not taking as much in. And we can support it in helping to detox and move these things out. So I just wonder, what are some of the best tools that you found for supporting our body and detoxing just all the stuff in the modern environment that ideally we wouldn't be taking in?
Yeah, I'm so glad you're asking me this. This is so important and something we don't really give a lot of thought to. You are right. We are constantly interfacing with things that our body has to process, mitigate, manage, expel, things it does not want. And it was never built to deal with. It's just the reality of breathing the air outside, eating the food, even as organic as we want to buy. So we have 5 organs of elimination. And if we can build a lifestyle around constantly supporting these organs of elimination, we have a better chance of not having an overwhelm of a toxic burden. So the first organ of elimination is our liver. Our liver is the main organ that is going to process and manage everything that comes in. We have these 2 detox pathways that take things in, transform them into things that we can manage better, that we can make water soluble and move out of the body. I'll go through each organ and then I'll tell you what it likes.
Great.
And then that'll help build this picture of how to support the detox systems. The liver likes a clean lifestyle. It does not like a lot of alcohol and Tylenol and medications. The liver loves lots of fruits and vegetables. It loves beets and dandelion, parsley, carrots. You could drink a dandelion tea every day, and that would be supporting your liver. You could drink milk thistle tea, and that would be supporting your liver. You can drink a little bit of lemon and water in the morning, and that would support your liver detox. So it's always going to be this idea of reducing the impact of things it has to detoxify and supporting the pathways of detoxification. The liver also does need all these micronutrients to do its job. So it needs B vitamins, magnesium. It needs glutathione, which is an antioxidant that we make when we have the right things on board. Your fruits and veggies, especially your greens, are going to give you these things. And of course, you can always supplement on the side. Next organ is the intestine. So the stool is a major form of detoxification. It's going to bind and move out a lot of things that we don't need. It's the primary way that heavy metals leave the body. You have to move your stool every day. I mean, obviously some people don't and they're surviving, but a healthy body and a healthy gut has a daily bowel movement. You can support this by eating lots of fruits and veggies, doing flax meal as like an add-on to your smoothie, your oatmeal, applesauce, whatever, chia seeds, psyllium, any of the fibers, they bulk and bind and help move things out. Proper hydration is key, of course, for the intestinal health. Outside of that, you can do magnesium and you can do things to get things going. I definitely go into this idea into my books because we have to move our bowels in order to feel good. We can feel bloated and uncomfortable and all sorts of things if we're not moving our bowels. And it is a primary detox organ. And if you're not moving your bowels every day, you're actually reabsorbing more of your toxins because the job of the intestines all the way down the line, the first part of the intestines is all about nutrient absorption, but the last 2/3 are about recirculating and like pulling the water back out of your stool so you don't dehydrate. And if things stick around too long, you're going to pull your toxins right back into your bloodstream.
And is the inverse of that true as well? If you're having too many bowel movements, does that also affect it? So like if you're experiencing diuretic effects from too much caffeine intake, for example, I imagine that it's almost the opposite, where it's not properly absorbed into the stool and it's actually moving out too fast to move it or something like that.
Correct. Yeah. If you have a quick transit time, which means it's too quick from A to B, less than 12 hours, then you will suffer from less nutrient absorption. It requires that amount of time. Between 12 and 24 hours is the ideal timeline from when you eat something to when you expel it. And it requires that much time to get everything reabsorbed. If you're really fast, let's say you eat beets and then 4 hours later you see red stool, that's too fast. And you're now in a situation where you could have malnutrition. Now, the kidneys are the next detox organ. And you mentioned if you have something that's a diuretic. So a diuretic would be something like coffee or alcohol that increases the rate in which you urinate. It's going to increase the production of urine. And when you have a diuretic, you don't concentrate your urine as well, meaning you're going to lose more minerals out with each urination and you'll feel more dehydrated. We actually respond to the loss of minerals and salts as a cue for dehydration more than just the water part of it. To support the kidneys, we drink water throughout the day. We sometimes have electrolyte-rich beverages. We try not to overdo medications and things that are toxic in the environment. The kidneys are, the next thing down the line from the liver as far as like managing those toxins. The kidneys love lots of water, fruits and veggies, and just, good hydration is what the kidneys mostly want. And you can also if you do your Qigong practice, you could put your hands on your kidneys and warm up your back. The kidneys do love some TLC there. Then we have the skin. The skin is an organ of elimination through the sweat. Sweating every day.
And absorption, which I found really fascinating. You talk about this is one of the things sorry to interrupt you, but I've been fascinated by is all the ingredients in our clothes.
Oh,
and the fact that we wear them all day, and anything we put on our skin is also being absorbed. And I just think a lot about this in terms of beauty products, lotions, anything that's going on your skin is being absorbed in some fashion. And it's a thing that I've become really passionate about because of that. Like the clothing industry and other things that go on your body is actually really important for maybe not quite to the degree that food is, because you're not literally ingesting it, but it still has an impact and matters quite a bit.
It really does. I'm glad that you're bringing this up, because what we put on our body is going in our body. And, I see all these beauty products, creams and such, and they are made with terrible ingredients. Even the ones that promote that they're natural and this and that, most of them are not good. And whatever you put on your skin is getting into your skin. You might as well be eating it. If you wouldn't eat it, don't put it on your body. It's really what I feel about that. There's a very cool website, the Environmental Working Group, EWG.
Yes, they're awesome.
Yeah, you can put in any beauty product, any cleaning product that you use, and it will rate it for you and tell you if it's teratogenic, carcinogenic, if it has any toxins in it. And these are the exact toxins that we're talking about that we have to deal with day in and day out. So we think we're doing really well because we buy organic food, but then we're putting a body lotion on every day that is filled with absolute junk. So yeah, I think it's worthwhile being really stringent about what we put on our body, and our cleaning products, our shampoo, conditioner, all of it. I try to keep it really clean. The sweat is a great form of elimination. Ideally, we should be sweating regularly. Sweating practices like sauna are some of the best longevity tips that we can use. It's, of course, there's the heating of the body and the heat shock proteins, which are very therapeutic, but the sweating itself, moving things out through the skin, is incredibly effective. Heavy metals leave the body through the stool and the skin. So that's one way we're going to get those metals out and other things. So sweating is really important. The breath is an organ of elimination.
I was wondering what the fifth one was. Yeah. Okay. The breath. Interesting.
It's breathing. Yeah. Breathing out CO2. We exhale. In fact, that's when we lose weight, we lose it through the breath. So we metabolize, our body does all its cool stuff, and then we actually lose it through our exhale.
Huh.
Yeah. It's just very neat. If you think
yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. So if you weigh yourself before you go to bed and you weigh yourself when you wake up before going to the bathroom, you'd probably be a pound less. Where'd it go? It left through the breath. It's really neat. Yeah.
That is
So the
cool.
breath is a form of detox, and it is obviously a form of nervous system regulation. When we slow the breathing, we get into the parasympathetic state. We regulate our nervous system. It communicates to our brain and our body that we're safe. And so breathing intentionally, not just the involuntary breathing we do all day long, but bringing your attention to your breath to deepen the breath, exhale more deeply, allow for more CO2 to off gas so more oxygen can come on. In order for oxygen to be able to attach itself to the red blood cells, you have to have expelled CO2. And there's only going to be as much room as CO2 has left. So that full, complete exhale will allow for a full, complete inhale and more oxygenation. And of course, we need oxygen for our cells to work and to continue the detox process. And these are things that we can add into our life. A detox living is eating fruits and vegetables and fiber, drinking lots of water, moving your body, sweating. And now you've done a detox. You just like add it into your lifestyle, as opposed to a 2-week cleanse, which that's cool too.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's when it most comes up, is in this idea of like, okay, for a while I'm going to detox, but actually I think it's, if you can build it into your lifestyle, then you don't have to do these kind of yo-yo type things along the way.
Exactly. Yeah. Which can feel really bad if you really have a big toxic burn-in.
Yes, for sure. So we could go for hours because your knowledge is over decades. I'm so grateful that you've already spent this time with me and with the audience.
So fun.
I'll just say again, the 2 books are wonderful. They're like everything that I wish I had known at the age of, 5, but especially at the age of 20 when I was starting my adult life. It's all the principles that I've had to kind of seek out and am constantly still trying to learn. And my recommendation for anyone listening, if they want a shortcut, is to add a naturopathic doctor that's skilled and knowledgeable to your healthcare support system. It doesn't have to replace your primary care doctor. It can be alongside everything you're already doing. And find one. If you're in Oregon, I bet Dr. Siegel takes an occasional patient, although there are many great practitioners here.
Yep, so many.
And there are probably some wherever you are. And so seek one out. And that can be a great way to just add some of this knowledge in a very workable plan so you don't get overwhelmed by it to your life. Dr. Erika, my last 2 questions are always the same. And the first one is, what is the most beautiful version of the future that you hope to bring to the world as a result of your work?
Great question. The most beautiful version of the future that I hope to bring with my work is for more and more people to take their health into their own hands, because they have the tools to do so and they recognize that they are worth the effort. Because their work is important and they can make the world, we're all here to hopefully make this world better. And so if you feel good, you can do good, and the ripples continue.
Yeah, and just that inherent sense of worth and belonging that people have just by, you use this term occasionally in your work, birthright, not to get too far off in the like esoteric coaching kind of side of things, but I think a lot of times we just doubt our inherent sense of worth and the value that we carry just by being here. And your health is a big reflection of that. Okay, my last question is, who are you becoming by doing this work?
Well, I guess I'm becoming a bigger version of myself, taking more chances to kind of like share the gospel, because this information should be available to everyone. So I'm becoming a bigger version of myself, which is a loving, compassionate person that wants to cheer everyone on to do their best. And I am bravely doing that, because it's not like, it's much easier to stay small. Trust me, I would prefer that in so many ways, but I'm becoming just a person who cares less and less about maybe what people think of me, and allowing myself to get out there so more people can have access to the information that they deserve to have.
I love that. Well, I'm very grateful for it. It's had a positive impact on me. From my seat, it seems like you're taking on a right-sized version of yourself.
Good.
Accurately sized version. And I hope you continue to do it, because I know it'll benefit a lot of people. So thank you so much for taking a right-sized version here with me for a couple hours, for spending some extra time with us, and spreading your knowledge. I'm really grateful for it.
Thank you, Barrett. This has been really nice. So nice to talk to you today. And thank you for the work that you're doing. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to another episode of Good Work. My name's Barrett Brooks. I'm your host, and this show is produced by my friends over at Podcast Royale. My guest today was Dr. Erika Siegel. She is a naturopathic doctor. She is an author of an excellent book set called The Nourish Me Kitchen. It's divided into 2 volumes. The first one is Essential Health Wisdom, and the second is wonderful recipes to help you feel great and perform at a high level. This is all of the knowledge that I wish I had when I was getting started on my entrepreneurial journey. So I knew what it would take to sustain my body, to sustain my brain and my mind and my spirit ultimately, so that I could do important work for a long period of time that has a huge impact on the world. And I had just one wish for each of you. It's that you would be able to both gain this knowledge and put it to work for you, so that you don't only serve others through the work you do, but so that you can feel great and feel deserving and worthy of feeling great along the way. I know that's a little optimistic and maybe woo-woo for some of you, but I really do care about you as people, and I care that you feel good. I care that you get to go through life and have a great experience of doing your work along the way. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love you to do 2 things. First of all, if you're not subscribed, hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever. And secondly, if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love you to grab the link and drop it into a text message to one of your close friends, someone that you think would enjoy the show and maybe particularly enjoy hearing Dr. Erika's story and her knowledge that she shared about how to take great care of ourselves. So share this with a friend. If you're so inclined, I'd love it if you'd share on social media too. That's always awesome. I love hearing from people there. I'm especially active on Twitter and Instagram. And otherwise, just thanks for being here. I know it takes a lot to spend 2 hours with me every week. And I hope you got something from this episode. And I hope you'll check out Dr. Erika's work at nourishme.com. I'll see you on the next episode.